The following program is presented as a public service by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation.
Such was the fury of their fighting that their spears turned back, bent and splintered from their tips to their rivets.
KTCA-TV, St. Paul, Minneapolis, presents Ireland Rediscovered, a series of 13 programs dealing with the significance of the Irish nation which has emerged to statehood in our own times. Dr. John McKiernan, head of the Department of English at the College of St. Thomas in St. Paul, and an authority on Ireland, is host and lecturer. The title of this program is Myths and Heroes, a program on the literature of Ireland. Here again is Professor McKiernan.
I am the wind which breathes upon the sea. I am the wave of the ocean. I am the murmur of the billows. I am the ox of the seven combats. I am the vulture upon the rock. I am a beam of the sun. I am the fairest of plants. I am a wild boar in valor. I am a salmon in the water. I am a lake in the plain. I am a word of science. I am the point of the lances of battle. I am the God who creates in the head the fire. Who is it who throws light upon the meeting of the mountain? Who announces the age of the moon, if not I? Who teaches the place where couches the sea, if not I? I have read to you what is probably the oldest poem in any European language, with the exception of Greek. It is remarkable that thousands of years afterwards, we can hear the words of an ancient poet in a language which is still spoken on the continent of Europe, the Irish language. I have, of course, read you the English version. But this illustrates for us the age, the great age of Irish literature, for it is the oldest vernacular literature in Europe, far older than that of any other living tongue, with the exception of Greek. This literature was perpetuated orally, as we might expect, since writing really did not become extensively used in Ireland before, let us say, the 6th century. It was perpetuated orally even before the birth of Christ. It came to be written down possibly as early as the 7th century, but hardly anything before that. I ought to tell you, before I give you some further examples of this literature, a bit about the social situation of the poet. We commonly associate starving in the garret with the craft of poetry. We're likely perhaps to think of it even as a dangerous occupation, pointing out that Keats and Shelley and many another poet died in his 20s. But ordinarily, of course, we don't get far away from the impractical image of the poet. It's not a craft at which one makes money in our civilization. Now, this was hardly true in any of the Celtic civilizations, and not at all true in Ireland. The poet occupied an honored place. Indeed, kings stood in awe of him, and every king and minor noble vied one with the other to honor the poets. Actually, of course, the poet's power was too great, possibly, at one time. And the Irish kings, as I shall illustrate a little bit later, sometimes trembled before the power of the poets. And although our president, at his inauguration, honored a poet and was honored by the presence of that poet, still I'm sure that Mr. Kennedy did not tremble before the departed Mr. Frost. At any rate, in Irish circles, patronage existed, which was quite a different sort of poetic patronage from that which we find later in English and even in modern American history. The poet was an honored person, and the king had an obligation to support him. So it is that there must have been a great wealth of poetry and prose literature too in ancient Ireland. The harrowing experiences of Irish civilization have still left us a rather large volume. I don't mean volume in the sense of one book. Many, many books would be filled with the relics of Irish poetry, but have left us a large amount of poetry still in the old tongue. These poems and other writings are to be found even scattered about the continent, in St. Gall, in Turin, in Nancy, in Milan, in Würzburg, in Vienna. Many a continental city is honored by having as some of its artistic treasures these ancient vellum copies of an even more ancient oral literature from Ireland. The poets themselves were ranked according to the years of their study and according to the degree of their competence. Something remotely similar perhaps to our college and university degrees, the BA and the MA and the PhD. Julius Caesar mentions in his account of the Druids in Gaul that often they studied for as long as 20 years before reaching the height of their craft. So then we have this hierarchical, step-by-step division of their competencies until one reached the highest step possible. He was given the title of Ullav, which is translated in modern Irish as professor. At any rate, at this point, he was supposed to know completely by heart the outline for 350 pieces of literature, so that these could be given with his own particular embellishments perhaps, but nonetheless structurally sound. These could be given on call, and the king was sure to call for them, particularly at the triennial fairs where hundreds and often thousands of people were gathered together in a cultural event and also to witness physical prowess, feats of physical prowess. Well, now, possibly it's time to mention the types, some of the types and some of the specimens of the old Irish literature. Some of the oldest literature we refer to as the mythological tales. There are many examples, but since I'm merely going to mention them, I won't go deeply into them. However, I might mention that these were tales of the gods. We're familiar with tales of the gods from Greece and Rome and from other countries. These were similar tales. Tales of people like Angus Og, Lugh, the great Celtic god who is commemorated on the continent, by the way, even in the 20th century, by having his name in a somewhat changed form appear on the maps of European countries. For instance, Lyon, Leiden. These are only two towns and cities in different countries, both of which have their association with this Celtic god, who has given his name to the month of August. The Irish word for August is Lunasa. So we have tales of the gods, of Angus, of Lugh, and of other gods. We have also tales of the settlement of the country, the mythical settlements. And one name that features quite often here, if you read any Irish literature, even, let us say, modern literature such as that of William Butler Yeats, you will come across the name of the Tuatha Dé Danann, Tuatha, Tuatha Dé Danann. These are some of the mythological settlers of Ireland. And then lastly, we might class with this mythological group, we might class the wondrous voyages of Irish heroes and in some instances Irish saints. One of the most famous of these is the voyage of St. Brendan, who reputedly sailed to America as early as the 6th century. I'm not interested in whether this is accurate or not, although it has long been debated by scholars. But the voyage of St. Brendan is such an example of one of these mythological voyages. So we have one group then of literature, the so-called mythological group, with which I associate these wondrous voyages. Then we have a heroic group, a group of tales about one of the most historic places or historic parts of Ireland, Ulster, the northern part of Ireland, which indeed is one of the most Irish, historically and literarily speaking, one of the most Irish parts of the country. So it is about the heroic sagas, the heroic tales, that I shall talk for the next few minutes, such as I have. One of the beautiful tales associated with the heroic sagas is the tale of Deirdre. Now, I know that many of you have read poems and plays and even fictionalized accounts of this great Irish queen. Hardly a modern Irish writer from the time of William Butler Yeats to the present moment, hardly an Irish writer is there who has not touched upon the tale of this sorrowful queen, or this queen who was the Helen of Troy of Ireland. Each of these poets and dramatists has treated her differently, of course, as he has seen her, but she remains one of these great figures of the world's literature. A woman who brought destruction, who brought fighting in her train, whose great beauty stirred the hearts of men. I haven't time to tell you that tale, but there are many copies available for you in the public libraries and elsewhere. Suffice that we know that the tale of Deirdre, the Helen of Troy of Ireland, is one of the tales associated with the heroic legends, the heroic tales that I shall tell you about now. Another is one called Brickrew's Feast, B-R-I-C-R-I-U, Brickrew's Feast. This is an extraordinarily interesting one, not only because Brickrew himself is the kind of character perhaps to whom we'd like to give a good slap once in a while, but because this tale embodies one of the oldest instances of the so-called beheading motif in European literature. This tale was to reappear in English literature in the tale known as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. But centuries and centuries before that, it had been part and parcel of the tale of Brickrew's Feast. Cuchulainn, the great hero of Ireland, features in that as the only man willing to allow himself to be beheaded in order that he might keep his word. And this you recognize if you recall the outlines of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So the tale of Deirdre and the tale of Brickrew are two world-famous tales associated with the heroic sagas of Ireland. The tale that I shall, during the rest of this program, the tale that I shall recount at a little greater length is the central one of all. It is called in Irish the Táin, T-A-I-N, the Táin Bó Cúailnge, or the cattle drive of Cooley. Now possibly we need to adjust our minds to the meaning of wealth before we even begin this tale. Wealth to us is merely money. But money actually is of very little importance in the world. If we were on a desert island and had $1 million and not a drop of water to drink, the money would be worthless. So that we must remember that it wasn't too long ago in the world culture that money represented, or wealth rather, was represented by cattle. So that now we are prepared with that reminiscence to go back into the Táin, one of the oldest of the Irish epics. And I shall read to you pieces from it in English translation, modern English translation, and I shall make some appropriate comments so that you may understand and appreciate the importance and the relevance of this very, very old piece of Irish literature, the relevance of it to us today. Now I have misplaced my book momentarily, excuse me, here it is. Now this epic begins in a rather homely manner, a thoroughly human manner. A man and his wife are quarreling. A man and his wife, shall I say, are having a difference of opinion. It so happens, however, that this man and his wife are king and queen in the western part of Ireland, the part called Connacht. It is Queen Maeve, a great warrior queen. And this was an interesting feature amongst the Celts that we sometimes, in fact, not too seldom, not too often, but often enough, come across women in battle, Amazons, if you will. Of course, we've returned to this in the 20th century with our women's auxiliary forces, I suppose. But at any rate, here is this great queen, Maeve, in the west of Ireland, who is a proud and haughty figure, who married her husband but feels not the least bit inferior to him in wealth, in personal accomplishments, or anything of that sort. So I suppose, having nothing else to talk about one day, she began comparing herself to him and reminding him that although she was his wife, this did not mean that she was in any way inferior. Talk about the emancipation of women, it came a bit early. But at any rate, in comparing the wealth with her husband, she realized that her husband and she were equally matched in almost every respect, except that he possessed a very fine white bull. It's true, it had been sired out of one of her cows, but it was his bull. And of course, we might realize that even in the 20th century, I think it was the carnation bull, but there was some bull that was sold for a rather extraordinary sum, 100,000 or more. Now, be that as it may, her husband had the advantage in that he had this white bull. She resolved then that she would get another splendid bull, even at the cost of war. This very famous bull, known throughout the provinces of Ireland, an Ulster bull, which was called the brown bull, the Doon bull, if you will. So she decided she would send her messengers and beg the use or the loan of this bull. This request came to the man whose name was Dara, the man of Ulster who owned the bull, and he said, "Why, of course, I'd be delighted to lend it to you." But then, through one of those remarkable, shall we say, extremely unlucky chances in the world, in the world's history, the night before Maeve's messengers were to depart with the loan of the bull, the night before they were being wined and dined. And when the wine goes in, you know, the truth comes out. So that as Maeve's messengers were talking, they boasted a little bit foolishly. And one of them said, "It is good that Dara has given the bull willingly, for were not the bull given willingly, yet should he be taken by force." Now at that moment it was that Dara's chief steward came into the house, and with him a man with drink, and another with more food. And he heard the foolish words of the messenger, and anger came upon him. And he set down their food and drink for them, and he said, "Neither eat," nor did he say, "Eat not." Well, he went and reported to his master what he had heard, how his master had been insulted by the boast. And of all things, these were the days of aristocratic pride, of great feats of prowess, of honor, and so on, so that this did not sit well with Dara to think that these messengers would boast that had the bull not been given, they would have taken it by force. So the next morning, when they come before Dara, and not remembering the drink of the night before, they say they'll take along the bull. Dara says, "Oh, no. But if it were my custom to deal foully with messengers or with travelers or with them that go by the road, not one of you would depart alive." So he chases them home. They go back to Maeve and they report what has happened. And Maeve, in her great fury, then says the bull will be taken. And she sends her armies against the borders of Ulster. Now, at this time, the men of Ulster were suffering from a magical sickness. I can't give you the background of that story. We'll simply say a magical sickness, which visited them as a punishment annually and lasted generally about 9 days. Very few people were exempt from this, but Cuchulainn, the great Achilles of Ireland, was exempt from this. And Cuchulainn alone was able to protect the entrance to Ulster, the gates of the north. Now, this would be in the modern county of Louth. It's not very far from Dundalk, but be that as it may, on the eastern coast toward the north of Ireland. So Cuchulainn then alone is around to protect Ulster from this particular invasion. Now, in the ranks of the Connacht armies, in the ranks of Maeve and her husband Ailill, although it's Maeve we hear about, in the ranks of Maeve are some exiled Ulstermen. One of them a former royal member, a former king by the name of Fergus. We'll hear about Fergus in just a moment. Another man present there, and a foster brother, that is a brother by not adoption of the same parents, but knit together by close ties of association and friendship from youth onward, a man by the name of Ferdia. He was a great warrior, perhaps the equal or close to the equal of Cuchulainn. And Maeve prevailed upon him to fight Cuchulainn. Ferdia was not easily won over. In fact, until she threatened to have him satirized by her poets and shamed before all the men of Ireland, until then he could not. No wealth could tempt him, but the threat of having the poets satirize him and make him a laughingstock in his own country, this was what spurred him on. And he met then with Cuchulainn. The descriptions of the meeting are extraordinary. They show the great Irish love, the Celtic love of color, of exuberance, of delight in words, and joy in life, we might say. But a chariot, for instance, Fergus then decides that he will go to warn Cuchulainn that Ferdia, his own foster brother, will meet him in mortal combat. Fergus's chariot is thus described as it is espied in the distance, coming near. Cuchulainn's charioteer describes it, and here is that color and exuberance that I told you about. "What manner of chariot is it?" asked Cuchulainn. "A chariot like to a royal fort, huge, with its yoke strong, golden, with its great board of copper, with its shafts of bronze, with its 2 horses, black, swift, stout, strong-forked, thick-set, under beautiful shafts. One kingly, broad-eyed warrior is the combatant in the chariot. A curly, forked beard he wears that reaches below, outside over the smooth lower part of his soft tunic, which would shelter 50 warriors on a day of storm and rain, under the heavy shield of the warrior's beard." And so this lavish, exuberant description. And Fergus tells him Ferdia is coming. And now both men are bound in honor, and neither can withdraw. Do we come up then to this battle between 2 men evenly matched, but 2 men who are really blood brothers, each of them a hero in his own right, each of them fighting now only because honor binds him to do so. Well, the battle is appropriately described. Cuchulainn, for instance, refuses to arise early for the day of the battle, because if he were to arise early, it would betray nervousness. So he sleeps late, and he gets to the ford, and Ferdia is already there, the ford in this stream. And so then they fight for 3 days and for 3 nights. A tremendous battle, but each day it ends in the reconciliation of friends. So they ceased, and they threw their arms from them into the hands of their charioteers. Thereupon each of them went toward the other in the middle of the ford, and each of them put his hand on the other's neck, and gave him 3 kisses in remembrance of his fellowship and friendship. Their horses were in one and the same paddock that night, and their charioteers at one and the same fire. And they had their meals together, and so on, because they were not fighting out of vindictiveness or hatred. This was an aristocratic notion. They were fighting for honor. The tale ends with the death of Ferdia, and with Cuchulainn's sorrow that his friend has died in this battle. Cuchulainn stands over his dead friend, and he pays him a tribute. He remarks on his bravery and cries manly tears that his foster brother should have been taken from him. The men of Connacht think then, even though the death of Ferdia sets them back, that Cuchulainn has been so weakened that perhaps they can come forward. But they find to their dismay now that the men of Ulster are recovering from their magical sickness, and they come upon the men of Connacht, and a great battle ensues, in which Cuchulainn himself takes part. The epic ends very shortly afterwards. But the remarkable thing about it, here is we have this picture of warriors who fight in single combat, who fight in honor, who fight with a certain kind of joy, if you will, not with a petty hatred, not with a psychological warfare, but who fight out of principle, and who sing each other's praises and pay a noble tribute to each other. Now perhaps, with that very inadequate presentation of the central portion of the greatest of the Irish epics, the greatest of the Irish hero tales, perhaps now you can understand why the symbol of Cuchulainn, this Ulster warrior, became the symbol for all Irish manhood, and why we find a statue to Cuchulainn today in the General Post Office in Dublin, on O'Connell Street in Dublin. And there he stands, dying, strapped upright to a pillar, so that even in his death he might face his enemies and be a constant threat to them. This is part of the tale that concludes the life of Cuchulainn, a man who said, "It is better to live with honor than to die with dishonor."
Ireland Rediscovered is produced by KTCA-TV, Twin Cities Area Educational Television Corporation. The next title in this series is Warriors and Lovers. Host and lecturer is Dr. John McKiernan. Ireland Rediscovered is directed by Carl Brookins and produced by Joseph T. McDermott. This program was presented as a public service by the Patrick Butler Family Foundation.